it ends up being the Gaia hypothesis, right? It's a living planet. Yeah. And at some point, the planet wants to get rid of the poisonous species that's damaging it, right? And so the infectious species that's becoming dominating. So.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show's Thrawn and on and on.
Yeah, but I want a purple one. I'm like the second baddest Jedi in the universe next to Yoda.
I'm Sean.
I'm Daniel.
And today we are talking about another of the Star Wars books, but as is the usual thing that happens with Thrawn and on, we switch back and forth between different canons. Last time we did Legends, or what is now called Legends, the original expanded universe. This time we are in the current canon or new canon, or I don't know, depending on the internet, how you want to call it. And the book we are talking about today is the, as it is written here, resplendently purplish Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss by Stephen Barnes, published in August of last year. It is an exceptionally purple-ass book. I just gotta say. They really, really, really were like, I wonder if okay, so obviously the face, if you see the cover.
Purple to 11.
Obviously Samuel L. Jackson, right? Like, it's not a approximation. It's literally meant to be him. I wonder if he was like, can you also make the books that have me in them purple? Probably not.
In fact, if you use like a magnifying glass to look at his lightsaber hilt, you can actually see the BMF engraved into there. On the lightsaber hilt.
You liar. I wish that was true, and if I had a magnifying glass, I would do it, but I know you're a lying sack of crap.
I have microscopes, I have microscopes, Sean. I've seen it.
All right. Oh, Lord almighty. So, Daniel, what is this book about? Tell us about Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss.
So Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss begins just after the conclusion to The Phantom Menace. And so Qui-Gon Jinn has been killed by the return of the Sith. As they, mourn his loss, Mace returns from Naboo and the funeral, returns to Coruscant and plays a hollow recording that Qui-Gon left for him in the event of his death. So basically, right prior to the events of Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn went on a mission to the planet, Metagos. And so he had gone to Metagos to chase after a criminal, basically. And while there, he didn't actually get the criminal, and he found out that this planet was much more corrupt and problematic than he ever expected. And Qui-Gon came very close to being killed while on that planet. But he was only saved by some of the people that may be natives, may just be very, very old sort of immigrants to the planet. It's unclear necessarily of what the exact history is. He's saved by a member of that and basically owes them one now. And so now that Qui-Gon has joined and become one with the Force, he tells Mace, hey, I have this unresolved business here and I owe these people one. Can you need to go to this planet now and finish what I had begun and am now unable to finish. So Mace journeys there and quickly finds out that he kind of has to be undercover in terms of he can't blatantly show himself to be a Jedi or he will be targeted as Qui-Gon ended up being. Because this planet, again, I don't know, I keep blanking on the name, Metagos is a planet that it's a desert planet that has been basically damaged by solar flares. So intense solar
wiped clean by solar flares.
Yeah. Well, the surface
with other questionable activities occurring as a result.
Correct.
Yeah.
So billions of people died because of the solar activity that turned most of the surface to this, glass that gives the name of the book, the title of the book. And so people have gone underground, but the people underground were originally these sort of native inhabitants called the Sa'ad, a group of people, and one of those people of the Sa'ad was the one that had originally saved Qui-Gon, and so her name is Kinshan Nightbird. So Kinshan Nightbird is the one who had saved Qui-Gon, and now connects with Mace when he arrives. And this group of the Saad, they are in charge of taking care of this kind of like spider / worm type species that makes this really, really strong silk. And they have this sort of social and biological relationship with this species that produces the silk. But the criminal elements of the world had been previously like banished to the subsurface, but then when shit went bad because of these solar flares, all the rich people and the people in power then had to flee to the subsurface, which led to the criminals basically now have power over all of them. And so it was like this reversal, and now the criminals basically run everything and oppress everybody. And everything on this planet was kept in a balance because there were two warring criminal factions, one by a singular / pair of people called Chulak, who is actually two individuals that has merged. I was reminded at least of Too Bad from Masters of the Universe even though Chulak has 4 legs and 4 arms, but it's a similar concept of two individuals being kind of merged into one with a psychic connection. And so a really formidable warrior, bright mind, and criminal has one criminal enterprise. The other criminal enterprise is by this big creature that reminded me of the Slurm slug in Futurama that's named Sybil and has lots of offspring, like hundreds / thousands of offspring, Sibylline type offspring. So those are the two warring factions. But the balance between them has been upset because somebody is now stealing those silk-producing creatures and is abusing the Saad and is now kind of changing the balance of power to try to take control of this really strong economic export that the planet of Metagos has. And so Mace winds up into this mess basically because Kinshan Nightbird calls in the favor from Qui-Gon to say things are getting worse here. We really need somebody like a Jedi to figure out what's going on, what has happened to our creatures that produce the silk that are being stolen, who's doing this. We need somebody to help us. And so Mace arrives and he's trying to balance between learning about the secrets of this planet, who all these sort of competing species and people are and cultures. At the same time, he's, undercover and pretending to be like a rim runner, it's called, sort of a freelance criminal himself. And so he's both working for Chulak, the joint person, one of which is Rhodian, so like Greedo. The other one is another race that I don't recall. I don't know if it's in Star Wars otherwise. But then he also ends up, talking to Sybil and her criminal organization. So he's trying to play both sides in a way while trying to figure out what is going on and how he can manage to save things on this planet without causing the demise of more people, if that is even possible. At the same time, he's learning more about his own past and history and what led him to become a Jedi. As he begins to question it because he is being sort of attacked through the Force as he is on this planet. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of parts to the novel that come together as you get towards the end a little more.
Okay, so let's start talking about this book. You've now summarized it as best you can because it's actually kind of difficult to summarize this book. And I'm gonna ask you, what did you generally think about this book before I give you my opinion, which will make you grumpy?
I overall enjoyed it a lot. It's not a perfect book. Both people that I've read reviews of that didn't like it, I can understand what they're saying. I think they're wrong because I definitely enjoyed it much more. So I'm curious what you didn't like. There are flaws in its construction, I would say, and in the point of view as it's being written. It's not what I expected of Mace Windu in terms of his philosophy. We don't get a lot of Mace Windu really from the prequel movies, right? He's a badass. He's almost as much Samuel L. Jackson as he is Mace Windu as a character. So I was really curious to read this and get that sense. And it's not what I was expecting fully, but I was also kind of okay with that.
Okay.
So what I did love about it, to sort of give a broad overview, is one, from the opening chapters, particularly the second chapter, I loved his curiosity in going on this alien world and trying to figure out how it worked. And a lot of that includes a lot of biological and scientific perspective that for me I found really interesting because Stephen Barnes gets the biology actually right, which is not always the case. And so those concepts I thought was kind of cool and interesting. The other aspect of the novel that I liked overall goes with that, and goes along with some of the criticisms that I saw. So when I first went and added this on Goodreads that I was actually reading it, the way, because I have ad blockers for some reason, whenever I click on it, it like jumps to the bottom and I have to scroll back up. And as I was scrolling up, I saw like 1-star reviews, 3 out of 5. And I was like, wow, I thought this was generally pretty good. Why are there so many, mediocre or bad reviews? And there were a lot of people that basically said, like, this isn't a fun Star Wars novel. There's too much about the planet. There's too much about these other characters. There's too many chapters that just focus on these different cultures. And that's what I loved about it. When I was reading it, I was like, this reads like a sci-fi novel, not like a Star Wars novel. It reads like somebody that's writing science fiction, speculative fiction in a world, and it's set in the Star Wars universe, but is dealing with things that could have been completely outside of Star Wars, really. And I found that interesting and engaging.
Well, okay.
Now Sean tells me I'm wrong.
Look, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a very good book. I just think as a Star Wars novel, it doesn't do what I would expect. There are production issues with the audiobook where it is very obvious that they re-recorded certain lines in the audiobook, but it was not in the same studio conditions, so the sound is different. So that I was not pleased with. And I think the thing that I wanted out of this book is the thing I did not get really in this book. It is a book, if you're looking at the cover, that says Mace Windu, the Glass Abyss. The Glass Abyss is the tiny part. Mace Windu is the big part, right? Even Star Wars is tiny compared to Mace Windu. His big dick's energy exceeds the Star Wars energy. But the book we get is like Mace Windu and a lot of other people. It's not really a Mace Windu story to me. It is a bunch of different people's stories. And for me, that was the thing I found the least interesting, was really about the way the story's written. It's basically written as a bunch of like little vignettes, little brief, mini tiny chapters inside chapters with very little sections where it kind of lets the character breathe and have that character kind of grow. Every time when it starts getting interesting for me, there's now a scene break and we jump to another thing, and another scene break and we jump to another thing, and another scene break and we jump to another thing, another scene. It just constantly doing this. And for me, I just found that completely disruptive. And part of the reason that was disruptive is they would do that in the story, and then at times the story just shifts to a completely different character. Half the time when it does that, I kept thinking, I don't think this is necessary for this story. You have like, there's a moment when literally he adds in like 4 lines of Kin-Shan talking to one of her aunties for all of 3 lines. And I don't even remember what she said because it's completely meaningless to the story, but we have to have a scene break for it and then a chapter break. So for me, the way it was written is a problem. I wanted this to be a Mace Windu story, and every time it started to become a Mace Windu story, it sort of bounced away from being a Mace Windu story. So that's where I struggled the most. I will agree with you, though, that I actually thought the parts with Mace Windu, like in his head, thinking about the world he's visiting and what he's experiencing, that stuff was great. I just wanted more of that. Give me more. I liked him thinking about the world. I even liked his like little optimism when he's like seeing people and he's seeing kind of people doing good things, like Wolof, which is this doctor that's in the story. Mm-hmm. He's just like really respects Wolof, because he's this nice guy who just has like committed himself to the idea that I'm just going to do what is necessary to help as many people as possible. He's like taking a very Jedi-like mission. And I like that interaction between Windu and Wolof. I thought that was really interesting. I just think that the story that I got was not the story that I was at all expecting. And I thought that there were just choices that were made that for me didn't work. I don't think it's a bad book. I just don't think it's very good.
That's fair. I will agree with a lot of what you said. I think it's a difference of I wasn't bothered by it as much as you were, perhaps. Wow. I agree with you that, with that font of Mace Windu is in this. His story is central in terms of his journey here, particularly after the death of his friend Qui-Gon, and discover and being very uncertain about what the future holds, being uncertain of this young Anakin who might be, mocking and making fun of Yoda during his training. And he's like excited by the prospect of Anakin's power, but also very, very kind of worried about what might happen from this, right? So he's uncertain of the future, and that leads him, because of also the situation on the planet, to have to deal with his past because he was orphaned.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have clear memories of his past prior to being orphaned and taken in as a Jedi, because he was basically just like an infant, right? And so he's unclear, did I choose this, or was this chosen for me? How much of this is really what I want versus how much is it just what I accept because I was given? So there's this plot idea in there that is very much Mace Windu. The problem is there's so much other stuff that all the other stuff overshadows that. And in some ways, that Mace Windu side of things and his inner struggles in some ways become like the least interesting part of the book of all the stuff that's going on. The short chapters, there's like 78 of these fuckers in here. I mean, it's not that thick of a book so it's like the Da Vinci Code author. What the hell is his name?
Dan Brown.
Dan Brown or James Patterson. It's like these really, really short chapters. It aids in readability. I mean, I breezed through this thing in a day or just a little over a day. And I think Sean did too. So it aids in that like readability, but I agree with you. You're constantly shifting scenes. The chapter breaks didn't bother me as much on that, but I remember that exact scene you mentioned where Kinsha talks to her aunties and makes some comments, because it completely threw me out for a moment, because everything had been from the point of view of Mace. He was our point of view character, and I don't think there was much of anything, particularly not in the middle of a chapter, where all of a sudden you shifted point of view. Here, Mace Windu he like exited the scene, and then you have 4 lines from Kinshan. It was important in revealing how they really felt about Mace and their uncertainty of whether they could trust him. But you could kind of get that sense
information later,
right? We get that information later. We get it as Mace is there. He already knows they don't completely trust him. So I get what you're saying. It did something, but it wasn't wholly necessary. And it totally, particularly coming in the middle of the chapter for 4 lines prior to now beginning another chapter with a completely different, scene, it just seems weird. So I do get that.
Yeah. To me, it felt at times that the book was being written like it was a movie. And I think the problem is that in a movie, you could do a lot of this where you could like show General Grievous and you have a scene of him. And it's like, yeah, because this is kind of helping set a stage. We can't have it always be so tightly in a Star Wars character, just following one character the whole time, because then huge parts of the story of this big galactic story get missed. But I think when you transfer that to a book, and if you do too much of that, which I think this book does, it kind of, it does the thing we're kind of talking about where a lot of the Mace Windu qualities of this kind of get weirdly subverted. But it also just creates this like effect where we feel like we're bouncing around a lot. And later on, I felt like when we got to the action sequences, this became even more glaring, because I found almost all of the action in this story some of the least interesting Star Wars action that I've seen written. Because for me, the stuff that's the most interesting is the stuff we kind of mentioned, like the world building, the way the city's structured, the culture. I loved all that stuff. I thought that was pretty well done. And actually, Stephen Barnes does a great job of, mostly, not all the time, but mostly sitting with the character and their thoughts and their interpretation and understanding. Mostly Mace Windu gets to do these things, and it's great. That stuff's great. But once we get to the action sequences, I don't feel like the character is really integral to that scene. It just feels like we have a space battle and Mace Windu is there, and then it's over. And there's like very little character in that moment. There's very real conversation, very real sense. And when we get the big battle at the end of the book, which has this elaborate stratagem that they've come up with, that it feels like they came up with it in all of 5 seconds, and yet they enact it magically so successfully.
Yes. And that's very broken up too.
And it's very broken up, jumping back and back and back and back. And so to me, I think if they had cut back on the number of POVs we have, focused more on the character and then built up to those action sequences and had the character as the center point of these sequences, but him seeing what other people are doing and actually build up to this big battle, which takes place like 50 pages before the end of the book anyway. I just feel like that would be, I think that would be more effective overall. I see Rainbow Warrior saying that Stephen Barnes is a martial artist, so he thinks about his action sequences. Yeah. I guess in this story, I don't feel like that comes through.
I disagree with that.
Oh,
strongly.
Go for it. Okay.
I agree with what you said, but I disagree with that last bit. So what you talked about, that battle, it's very disjointed. Mace Windu's really not taking great part in it.
No.
He's more like, he helps rally them, he helps inspire them, but he's not integral to it at all. In some ways, that is to go along with that theme that this is about these people, the residents of this planet, finally stepping up to fight for themselves. It's not about Mace Windu fighting their battles for them, right? And so that's conceptually kind of an important idea. It gets broken up, and it's actually somewhat reminiscent to one of the things that I don't like about Phantom Menace. Lots of people complain about, the boring politics of Phantom Menace, and I actually find that really interesting.
It's not boring.
The only other than Jar Jar, the only thing that annoys me about Phantom Menace is the broken up Battle of Naboo interspersed with the lightsaber duel.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have Duel of the Fates playing, and you have Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan fighting Darth Maul, thank you. Fighting Darth Maul, but then all of a sudden you cut to, Queen Amidala leading like the troops through and a battle that's going on with the droid army. And so it's constantly cutting between. This reminded me of that in terms of the setup. Like you'd have a brief view of this, then a switch to this, then to this, and you kept going back and forth. That changes though, and you get Stephen Barnes' inspiration and interest in Asian cinema and martial arts for the final showdown between Chulak and Mace Windu.
Chulak, yes.
And that is, you see that strength finally. And that is the only chapter of the entire book, I think, that exceeds 10 pages, probably. That is the only one where it's towards, you have what you think is an ending, and then kind of like Return of the King in Lord of the Rings, you find out, oh no, there's going to be another ending.
Yeah.
And Chulak is alive, and Chulak and Mace Windu are going to have their face off finally. And that chapter is really long, and it's a very intricately plotted and shows, because it is almost like a martial arts battle. It's not a typical lightsaber duel. In fact, the lightsaber is barely even used at all. That's where you see that come into play. And if more of those battle scenes prior had been written like that, I think it would have been a much more successful, even with Mace Windu not playing a huge role in them.
Yeah, I agree. But we didn't get that book.
We didn't get that, no.
No.
But did you like that Chulak, like that ending, that chapter?
Chulak in general, I thought was a cool villain, just overall. So from start to finish, I thought he was such a fascinating character. He's a Farakai. Their species merges with another species. They basically become one, and they interconnect.
Rodian.
Rodian is in this case. They will connect with
something. Do they always do it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they always do this. They'll find somebody that they connect with, and then there's a bone structure that connects them. And what's cool is in the audiobook, they actually deal with the fact that some of the dialogue one of them speaks, and some of the dialogue the other speaks, and some of them they speak at the same time. And it creates this really unsettling voice, which is described in the book a bunch of times where people are like, oh, he sounds so creepy. And then they do the smart thing of when there's moments when the voice starts to separate, right? Where they're kind of unsure, they're not in sync for a brief moment. They do that in the audiobook. And
wow, that's pretty cool.
It really captured this character who sounds menacing. He's brilliant. He's violent. He's cruel. He is kind of a mastermind. He's quite brilliant. He knows. He's not one of those villains where he just charges in even when he knows he's going to lose. He sort of acknowledges those moments when, I need to use some other tactics here. So Chulak in general, I liked. I liked the ending fight, which I knew was coming as soon as they meet. It was oh, they're going to fight, because you can't have that much big dick energy in the same room. It's not possible. Uh, so, but I just love that character. He's such a great character. And you needed a great villain, and you needed a villain, I think, in this story that is a suitable foil to Mace Windu. Because of the gravitas that character brings, just from people who are already fans of the character.
And he brings that idea of being at war with yourself versus being at sync with yourself, right? Which is the same thing Mace is kind of dealing with in here.
A bit, yeah. Although some of that is manipulated, right? Because it turns out one of the Hylian queen creatures has been manipulating his dreams and giving him these really alarming dreamscapes where he starts to have different memories of what happened to his parents until he gets a real memory, which is they're like killed horrifically by like bears, basically, which is horrible. But yeah, so there's a bit of like a lot of subterfuge and manipulation in this whole scenario, which he goes into the when he arrives in New Xaxis, right? He kind of knows because it's sort of a criminal underworld. He's expecting lots of lies and distortion and manipulation, but he like doesn't expect it from the Hylians. They're who he doesn't initially expect it from. And it's not that they're being evil, it's that they're just like, they're killing us and we're kind of done with it now. We would like peace so we could have our mycelium network across the planet.
It's kind of it ends up being the Gaia hypothesis, right? It's a living planet. Yeah. And at some point, the planet wants to get rid of the poisonous species that's like damaging it, right? And so the infectious species that's becoming dominating. So
yeah, there's a ton of stuff in this book that is like fun Star Wars ideas. I saw a review complaining about, it felt like a bog standard sci-fi novel because of all of the weird biology, and I was like, yeah. No, that's Star Wars. Like you've got the Sybil, right, who is like a bug lady who just she basically like a bug praying mantis. Once upon a time she had a mate, and then she bit his head off after they mated, but he left enough genetic material that she could be making babies for generations. And so she's one of the powers that's here, and she's a thing. We've seen versions of this in like Geonosis has elements of this where they have like a queen that's on Geonosis. You see that in other stuff, so this is like a different take on it.
Whatever the one was in Solo, that movie.
There's also the like weird,
or it was in the Han Solo, monster. The novel that was based around the same time. Maybe it was too.
Yes. There's that too. Yeah. So that's really cool, right? You've got this solar wave that hits the planet and basically decimates the surface, wipes out pretty much everybody on there except the people that manage to get inside these like giant geodes, which is they make a home inside these giant geodes and tunnels. But that has also affected the biology. So you get all these like weird creatures that are like glass. And there's a horrifying image. I cannot remember where it is in the book, maybe somewhere in the middle, where someone mentions that the people used to they used to force people to go up to bring some of the old structures down.
Right.
And they'd be attacked by these semi-translucent creatures, and their like children would be eaten. And then they have to watch their children being digested inside.
Yeah.
Which...
that was the rich people that were like fleeing the damaged surface and the radiation. They wanted to move all their big expensive homes down, they just wanted to escape. But the criminals that lived down there were like, no, you can only come if you bring down all your stuff with you. And so they had to keep making trips up to bring all that stuff so that they could build the castles underground effectively. Yeah.
It's messed up.
And there's that idea that, this is not the first time. It happened 50 years prior in terms of this event, but as soon as Mace gets to the planet, he already sees like signs in the species that live there that have evolved there that this is something maybe that happens to the planet, intermittently across the millennia. And so, the most recent one was 50 years ago. And that gets to that idea that these species that are native, like the Hylians, to underground, and another mycelial kind of species that is even deeper underground, that gets to the idea that they're kind of the original ones on this planet. So
yeah, all of that stuff is fun. I really, really like that stuff. In some ways, I kind of want a Mace Windu. I know you're never going to get this because it's Star Wars, so there have to be like big battles and those kinds of things. But it would be kind of nice to have like Mace Windu amateur anthropologist. And he just... it's just him wandering.
Oh, it totally would, yeah.
Oh, I'd love that. It'd be so fun, and like he's like helping people and all these kinds of things, and all we get is like weird outer rim planet craziness. I'd love that. I don't know that Disney's ever gonna do it because like I think that Disney, the like Star Wars feel, we kind of have to have a lot of the elements that are in this book. So you'd have to build some sort of fight somewhere. But that's just the most fun stuff in this. It's just all the weird world building what's its.
And that's really, it's not what Mace Windu wants, but he keeps getting pulled back into this life of being effectively a general, right? Like the Clone Wars are going to come soon. And like it's one of the things I maybe wanted to talk about here. It surprised me just how like it did. And then as I thought about, maybe it didn't, but like how willing he is to just go in and kill and destroy. Like the doctor that you mentioned, Wolof, was it?
Wolof, yeah.
There's both a respect, but there's also like an envy that Wolof can afford to have these ideals and live according to them. Windu, Mace, also has these ideals of not wanting to kill people, but being put into the position of having to, whether it be because of, simple children coming to him and basically attacking him constantly, despite the fact that they're going to get slaughtered, or the Senate telling the Jedi they need to go and do something, or the Clone Wars breaking out and you're now directing troops to go fight. So he's this reluctant kind of general, but yet at the same time he seems to really like thrive in violence, and it's this weird dichotomy. And it reminded me of in the Attack of the Clones movie. I always found it weird that he just goes and decapitates Jango Fett like right away. It's like, couldn't you have just like, incapacitated him? Like, why did you have to go and decapitate the guy? If you're a Jedi for peace, like, it seems kind of harsh to do that as the, your first move as you're running up to this guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never really got a resolution with his character, even in this, it's this weird dichotomy.
It is a weird dichotomy they present here, and it's one that at times almost makes sense, because there's a huge sequence of chapters where he does get into violent altercations, but he tries not to get into them, and he mostly incapacitates who he's in the altercation with. Obviously, still very violently, because he snaps a lot of legs and limbs and other kinds of things. But like the very first fight he gets into, he just like punches them so perfectly that they're all unconscious at the end, but he does that on purpose, right? Because he's trying to get Chulok's attention and like, oh, look how good I am, blah, blah, blah. But he has these moments where he's asking himself about these questions of how much violence and killing is he supposed to be doing here. But at the same time, I don't quite buy that it's really a full tension for him, because he does just jump right into violence in multiple periods, including killing occasionally in this story, until obviously the very end, when it's kind of deserved. And I think that I think Barnes is trying to do something interesting with the character by giving him a conflict, because the character we get from the films, like, it is implied from the way it's acted that there might be some conflict there, but it's not ever told to us what that conflict really is. I think that this is a kind of thing that maybe this element of story needs to be addressed in future Mace Windu stories, especially like deep in the Clone Wars Mace Windu, when he's like wiping out entire armies, mostly robots, right? Although he says some things in here that suggest that he's not entirely on board with the idea that droids aren't sentient creatures worthy of respect. So there's that. But there's like a story to be told that I feel like this novel like hints at, but it isn't quite committed to fully telling. And I don't know how much of that is Barnes, or like the limits of the sort of medium, or I don't know.
What they told him to put in too, like what they told him to put in the novel.
He needs some psychological tension, because he can't just be smooth and suave and Sam Jackson. Yeah.
The droid stuff in this book I found kind of interesting too. I mean, this book has so much going on in it. A
lot.
And that to some way is part of the reason for its not complete success. I think it's trying to do too much, because there's all those things of like droid rights, droid autonomy that go into this in multiple spots. And it addresses it, but never fully. Right. And so
Yeah, it's kind of the thing where maybe if they just did a little less, the story would be able to kind of deal with those. Because you're right, like Maya 12 is a very, and her sisters, right, is a
Mhm.
very interesting droid character who like apparently can become like sassy detective droid lady, which is kind of fun. Uh,
Yeah, it's
so
like all of a sudden Star Wars turns film noir. And
I know it was a little bit. I was like, oh, I'm kind of here for it. I would love it. But she's a fun character too, and I
Yes, yeah.
I like that her story. As a droid, she gets so much attention to the like almost like the morality and philosophy of a droid. Like she has a moral framework in this, and I don't know that the story ever explicitly pauses to like say, "Oh, it's a droid with a moral framework," but it is
Mhm.
kind of there throughout. And Mace Windu in his conversations with her kind of inadvertently teases out some of
And
that
picks up
moral
on it.
framework
Yeah.
and picks up on it. I thought that was great. I loved that stuff. Maya
And
12 was
it's
a really cool character.
and it's contrasted with the droid like the worm droid, who's very
Yeah.
much like whoever has power, whoever's my master, they're the master, I serve them, right? And then you have the other droid that's like the very first thing Mace encounters on the planet, or one of the first, right? Is that
Oh, he's
damaged droid
cleaning.
that's
Yeah.
like cleaning around in a circle trying to find its master. And like the master's never going to return.
So it's just been wandering, moving
Yeah,
dust
and Mace
around.
is
Yeah.
like, how do I help this thing without destroying its reason for existence, right? And it comes full circle then at the end of the novel to returning to that droid. So, like, again, this novel's filled with lots of really cool ideas and contrasts and things. It's just kind of maybe a bit much
A little bit.
to really completely do.
But I'll give it this, which is that if this had been more successful, I mean, maybe it's sold enough, I don't know, but if it was a little bit more liked, there's so many elements here that like if they just hire Barnes again to write another one, be like that little thing you did there, I want a whole book about that now.
Yes, yeah,
Like the Maya droids, I would read a book about Maya
just about
12.
them. Yeah,
Yeah, I would love to read about those characters, Maya 12, Maya 8, Maya 14, like these
Mhm.
sister droids that can sort of change their form and be sassy noir detective robots and all kinds of things. And they have wings that they can fly. And it's like there's a lot of really interesting things that are there to tease out. And I think a story in Star Wars that really deals with the sort of ethics of droid ownership in this universe like is overdue. I'm sure maybe there's one somewhere that I don't know of, but
well,
it's
Solo did it
overdue
a bit, right? But that's about
a
it.
little bit, but kind of as a joke.
As yeah,
Like, yeah, something a little more serious.
and that was far too horrible of a movie to be like the
Okay, you
the
stop
way
now.
of going through this. So,
Rainbow Warrior is saying the Obi-Wan series, which I hadn't seen yet, maybe does some of this. So
oh, does it? I don't remember
yeah,
that.
Leia treated her droids kindly. Well, but this is what I'm saying.
Oh,
Like
yeah, yeah,
people are nice to their droids. Some of them are, right? It's very clear Luke really, really loves R2D2 and he cares about C3PO, but they're not free, right? They're like pets. And the problem with I think the droids in Star Wars is not this is not an original observation is for some of them it almost kind of makes sense because they're like intelligent, but they're like really simple. They're like children. They're like children levels intelligence. They're just really good at like star patterns or whatever. But then you get ones like Maya 12 in this story who are very clearly sentient. They
yeah.
have emotions. They even talk about it in this book that droids aren't supposed to have emotions, but Maya 12 has emotions. She feels, she has reactions. These are things that are not supposed to happen
And
with a
morality,
droid. And morality. She has
like
a
you mentioned,
morality.
yeah.
So, and Mace Windu does, I'm just going to spoil it for you, but Mace Windu basically says, I'm going to free you, as the thing he offers. So that suggests that droids can not be owned by somebody. They could just be totally free, which makes the Clone Wars that are about to come really alarming because one of those armies is just droids.
Droids.
It's almost entirely made up of droids. And I don't know, there's like a lot of cool stuff to be said here. I think if Barnes were to write a droid novel, I would be super curious to see what he would do.
Another thing I liked about this was all the references, all the Easter eggs in it. A lot of them he actually mentions in his acknowledgments are references to various martial arts films or John Woo, sort of like crime films, like what is Hard Boiled?
Hard boiled, yeah.
And I actually, even like the samurai ones he mentioned, I haven't actually watched those ones. And so I didn't know those ones. But the one that really stuck out to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious, was when he fights, I believe it was one of the Sibyls that starts attacking him. He like breaks several legs, and the thing keep is like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to attack you. It's basically like, have at thee. And he's like, is this guy
Monty
crazy?
Python.
Are you nuts? It was basically, the knight in Monty Python where he like lops off an arm, then he lops off another arm. He's like, what are you going to do? Bleed on me? It's effectively that scene. Which
yeah, they're all
it was amusing,
too.
but then also it's like kind of weird, like Mace Windu in a Monty Python film doesn't really work at the same time. So.
But it is like they're all rather comical, right? All of the Sibyl, like the Sibyls in general are like both comical, but also like really disturbing because their whole thing is they all get a number. They're all Sibyl, and then they get a number, except for the ones that haven't like made it out of. Like every group that's born has to fight their way until they survive up to a certain point in their gestation, and then they get a number. And how high up number you are determines like where you are in the hierarchy. So if you're like 232, which is one of the characters in this story, you're pretty low on the pecking order. But if you're like Sybil 4, right, you're pretty high up. You're one of the big ones. But you can see like every single Sybil has to... Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, please.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay.
I think isn't it Sybil X, the one that doesn't yet have a number, that actually is the one that like changes, right?
Yeah. Well, no. So Sybil 4, I think, is the one that starts to change, and then.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But yeah, so there's so like Sybil 4 makes a mention in there
makes
that
like a new life for themselves.
Oh,
like along with to support Mace, right?
Got it. Oh, that's what you mean. You mean a moral allegiance change.
Correct.
Got it.
Yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
I thought you meant gender change because
no.
the Sibyls. No.
So yes, yeah.
yeah. When the queen is killed, multiples of them will change to become the new queen. But if you're trying to maintain a hierarchy, you have to be the one that asserts the dominance first and become the new queen. So Sybil 4, I believe, is the one that begins to go through the change and says explicitly to us at one point, I basically have to assert power. I have to get in a position of power now so that none of the others that start the change will fulfill it, and that I will become the new queen.
And Barnes does interesting stuff there, and he doesn't fully hash it out, but it makes sense not to, of like Mace Windu sees this, and on the one hand, it revolts him, but on the other hand, he's like, this is the biology of it. And in fact, like if you're a biologist, like life is like that, right? There's plenty of animals that are like that. And it's like, who are we to judge how they're working, right? Yet we do judge, right? To us, that is a revolting thing. Human beings should not do that. Yet if we met an alien species that does that, would we judge them? Would we say like, no, you need to stop doing that? And so it's this, you're dealing with these issues of when is it fair to say like, no, you need to change your culture? When is that not something that's fair, right? When do you take a moral stand? When do you not? And say, no, that's just the way they do things here. It's not always cut and dry. And Barnes is kind of playing with that idea. And lots of sci-fi writers, lots of writers don't want to go there. They don't want to deal with that ambiguity. And so I kind of give props to having a story that includes that.
In Star Wars of all places.
Yeah, in Star Wars of all places.
Star Wars is not always terribly subtle.
No, it is not. No.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of that in this story. Wolof is a great example because he also is like a bug person who goes through a bunch of gestations, and they have an interesting conversation with him and Mace Windu, which is about like how. So when they go through their larval phase, eventually they go into cocoon, and then they like swallow the larva. It like liquidates, and then the new version, which is basically like a butterfly, right? It comes out. But Mace Windu asks him, "Well, how did you keep your memories? Because isn't the previous one technically dead, and you were a new being now?" And he's like, "Yeah, so I found some solution to that problem, so I could." Because he went to medical school as a larva. And then he's like, well, how'd you keep your medical training? Why didn't you just wait? And he's like, no, I found a solution to that problem. But he's also unusual because apparently his species, almost all of them, once they hit the point that he's hit in their life cycle, they return home basically to sit around, bone, eat, and then die.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite those exact words, but that's basically what they do. And he's decided instead, I'm going to help people, which again is something you said earlier. Mace Windu has like an enormous amount of respect and envy for, because he is just being a nice guy doing nice things. But it's also like, it's such a cool idea. Like, I want more. Give me more of this.
Mhm.
This is so cool.
And then they have that conversation at the end, which gets to Mace Windu's struggle of like, he talks to the doctor, and the doctor, at first wants to refuse to do something because it's going to cause the death of someone.
Yeah.
And Mace makes that argument then of like, I understand that, but like, if you don't do this and kill this one thing, or kill, the smaller number,
Yeah.
a lot more are going to die. And so it's that good of the many outweighs the good of the few or the one, right? That kind of concept that Star Trek got into too.
Yeah, it's a good conversation Star Wars has to have here, I think, because this is all over the Jedi conversation, right? That they're meant to be peacekeepers. Well, peacekeepers are sometimes going to have to kill people. Mace Windu struggles with this in this book of how much death is allowed. He even has a nightmare at one point where some of the people he has killed, like, basically haunt him, asking why. It may or may not be a real dream. It may be induced, but it is still a terrifying prospect. And that question is a tough one because, if you don't do anything, if the Jedi don't take down a drug lord who's like killing people left and right, how many lives are actually lost at this point, right? If Mace Windu doesn't induce the people to fight for themselves and be involved in that fight, how many people are going to be exterminated by Chulak and the Sibyls as they fight over control of the city? Innocent people. There's orphanages in this, right? With children in it that Mace Windu deliberately goes to save the children when there's this big battle. So I think like the book, even though the book I think doesn't necessarily always give us clear answers to some of these like moral quandaries, it is trying to ask us to think about them, to think about how much death are we willing to allow happen for some sort of moral framework of nonviolence. And Mace Windu is obviously not willing to allow children to be exterminated and all of these kinds of things. Bad guys have to die sometimes because that's the only thing you can do to stop them.
And throughout the novel, there's a few scenes with the most badass Jedi of them all, Yoda, who really is like the moral center of everything in Star Wars, that voices, that uncertainty that Mace faces, and voices himself that there are no easy answers to things and that this is difficult. And, he's like, I'm 800 years old and I still don't know necessarily what the answers are to these things.
Yeah.
So I like that kind of connection too, that even the most wise, right, is still learning, still uncertain of things.
It's also a fun thing that Yoda does very well, but Mace Windu also does in this, which is like he's 800 years old and he's sort of old enough to know that he doesn't know answers to a lot of things and is just humble about it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a couple moments when Anakin shows up in the story and like Yoda makes a bunch of comments about things that Anakin says. And they're these just like really understanding comments while Mace Windu's like, this little pissant kid is like being dumb. And then he just pauses to really think about what the kid's doing. And he's like, no, I can kind of admire. He really doesn't. He doesn't want to just be taught. He's just going to keep going until his body's exhausted and then keep going to try to learn something to prove himself. I can kind of respect that. I like that there's elements of that. Like Mace Windu doesn't have quite the level of humility that a Yoda has, but you can see some of that. Oh, my camera shut off.
Went away. Oh, that's fun.
Are you still hearing me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Why did my camera shut off?
Yeah, your camera just went away for some reason. Oh, here you come. There you are.
It just turned it off automatically.
All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should wrap up. We've been going a good amount.
Wrap up. But there's a question in chat. Did the Republic conquer inhabited planets? Do you mean the Republic at the time that we're talking now, or the New Republic? Because if you're talking now, yes.
They conquered them? Or they just let them into the... I thought it was more like the Federation, like you could enter into the Republic. I didn't think they went around and like colonized them per se, or conquered.
I would say, I use conquered not necessarily in a purely colonial perspective, but once the Clone Wars hits, they deliberately conquer a bunch of worlds because they've changed allegiances. That's true,
because
but I would say that that's messy too. This gets to like not clean answers because a lot of those worlds, their people don't entirely agree with being separatist. So it's kind of complicated. So yeah, so once the Clone Wars hits,
by the trade Federation too, right? So in some ways it's
but like Geonosis is conquered, straight up conquered. That because that's where all of the weaponry basically is. So they straight up just capture the crap out of it because they have to, right? So if you watch like the Clone Wars series, there's a whole bunch of stuff about them coming to Geonosis again because it's like the rising up again and trying to fight back and all of that stuff, and they find like a zombie queen. It's a whole thing. It's really fun. It's actually kind of cool. But they just are like, yeah, we have to basically control this because if they give the Separatists access to all of these resources, like it'd be harder for us to fight. So we just basically have to occupy this thing. But it's different, right? It's not like pure colonialism where they just like show up like the Empire later, right? Where they just show up and just take things.
Yeah.
It's more like we're trying to stop you from contributing to a war that's going to kill like billions of people. In theory, they're going to let them go later. Who knows? Anyway, you were right though that we do need to close down. So anyway, the next time we will go to the original expanded universe. I don't know when the next time will be, but probably in a few months. But
Hopefully.
If there are specific books that people are interested in and you'd like to let us know that what we should put on the poll for it, have at it. You can go to skiffingfanny@gmail.com, or if you are a member of our Discord, of our Patreon page, you can obviously go to the show discussion or book discussion and suggest it there, and I'll make a poll for the next time we do one of these things. Again, if you want to follow the show, we are all over the place. Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a whole bunch of other places. So please go to skiffingfantasy.com/skiffythings to find all that stuff. And then every Friday, 7 p.m. Central, we are live on Twitch at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams, where you can watch our shows live as long as my internet holds, which today has been a question mark. So yay. And then please spread the word about the show. Our show comes out in audio and video formats, so it's not just live. And you know what? Word of mouth is a big deal. Leave us reviews, tell us, share our stuff on the socials. And then if you have money to spare, patreon.com/skiffyandfanty is the place to go.
Yeah, if we get big enough, then maybe Disney will send us stuff.
I mean, honestly, for the most part, I like Disney stuff. So you know what? Like, for the Star Wars stuff, bring it. Let's go. So speaking of those Patreon supporters, we have to say thanks to Andrea the Alluring, Cameron the Chthonic, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Cultured, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, Karen the Kickass, and Kat the Kinematic.
Matthew the Magnificent, Paul the Pious, Phoebe the Eloquent, Robert the Riveting, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A. the Sensational, Sarah E. the Sublime, Sarah O. the Rapturous, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Therese the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant.
All right. If you want to find me, SeanDuke.net, Alphabet streams on Twitch every Wednesday and Sunday at 6 p.m. Central. And then SeanDuke.net/DukeThings if you want to find all my socials and YouTube, etc.
You can find me, Daniel, on the Skiffy and Fanty blog or at Reading 1000 Lives. That's Reading 1000, the number 1000 lives.
Perfect. And as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, we must make this happy. And I will just say this, despite my many criticisms today, I love me some Star Wars books, which is why I have a whole shelf full of Star Wars books. And so I just love it. Star Wars is great. And that's all I'm going to say. Star Wars is great. I love it. End of discussion.
Purple is great. I'll add that.
The cover is fire. Like, this is... like, I'm sorry, but if you were like, Mace Windu book, all purple, I'd be like, okay. Yep, 100%. All right, folks. Happy ending and see you. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.